Frank, good to see you. Thanks for making a bit of time to come and have a chat. We've talked on numerous occasions in the past about the importance of storytelling for business, and we're going to kind of look at that in a bit more depth today. For people that don't know you, just give people a flavour of your background, and then we'll talk a bit more about how you use narrative development and storytelling with Unipart, which is the thing we're going to talk about. I mean, just give people a little bit more background about you.
It's great, Paul. Thanks. Well, my background is as a journalist, which is where I started in newspapers and then later in broadcasting. And I moved into public relations, if you like, for companies, really looking after the communication with their stakeholders and worked for organizations like IBM, Barclays, and latterly I spent the longest part of my career with Unipart Group, which was possibly one of the most interesting companies I've come across. A company that largely people might remember for auto parts, but diversified significantly over years and became a logistics company working with an enormous number of blue chip clients and promoting a way of working called the Unipart Way, which became its foundational differentiator in a market that was very crowded, in a market where people basically did business on price, on lowest cost, and they changed the game on that. I think they promoted the idea that this was not just about cost; this was about delivering more for the customer. And the Unipart Way was a way of enabling people to do more for their customers.
Yes.
So I spent a lot of my time doing that, and then a lot of my time working with communities. As you know, you and I were both part of Oxfordshire Business First, which was a great business network that we had, and we were able to do some very interesting things, like run the big gig innovation events and run several sessions in the past on storytelling, which we did with SMEs. So that was always an important part, I think, of the things I was able to do while I was at Unipart, and that Unipart was instrumental, if you like, in enabling to take place as part of its community relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a kind of broad summary, I suppose.
Thank you. So, I mean, one of the things that I learned from the stuff that we did with Oxfordshire Business First and with Unipart was really how important storytelling is. And actually, for the most part, how terrible businesses are at it was the kind of. I know it's a bit harsh, but actually, I came away thinking actually there's a lot to be learned about narrative development and storytelling that is very valuable to businesses. So let's just go back to that. Why, I mean, just to explain for people that perhaps aren't as familiar with this stuff as we are, why is it, do you think, that narrative development in a general sense and storytelling in particular, why would you say those are so important for businesses?
So I think if you start with understanding a narrative, it's about a broad framework, isn't it? It's about a broad set of ideas, a position, if you like, that you take about who you are, and what you do, and what your values are. And within that narrative framework, you illustrate that with stories that demonstrate and validate your framework, what you say you believe. So if you say in your narrative framework that we're a company that is absolutely customer focused, the stories that you tell illustrate that, validate that claim, and if you tell them really well, and if they're engaging and authentic is very important. It's not about, can I write a piece of fantasy, but they are authentic stories that illustrate who you are, what you believe in, and how you deliver that. Then people will begin to trust a little bit more. Maybe we'll begin to make a decision that you're the sort of organization they want to do business with, or that you have the sort of product that absolutely is going to meet the need that they have. And so you get that kind of connection between their needs, starting with the customer need, and then your offering. I think it's the level of saying, well, there's lots of people who can do that. What differentiates me?
Yeah.
And it's either going to be a differentiator in something that your offering has that's special and different, but often that's quite difficult. But what can be the differentiator is trust. And there is some data out there which says that I think there's something like a 30% improvement in conversion rates due to trust. If people trust a company, if they trust an organization, if they trust a government, yeah, they're more likely, significantly more likely to want to do business with them, to want to be engaged with them, because they establish that level of trust. When that trust is not there, so think about simple decisions like you're on Amazon and you look at a whole bunch of products, and then you go and look at, well, what do the reviews say? And if they have a lot of very positive reviews, and the people in the reviews have told stories about how they've used the product, and you build that level of trust, that confidence in what can be a very simple decision. And so stories can enable that. I don't think it's magic. I don't think it's like a formula that you say, well, if you want to get trust, develop trust, you have to tell stories. That's not what I'm saying. I think they're a factor that helps you to explain who you are, what you believe in, how you deliver whatever it is you deliver, and why someone should trust you and be aligned with you.
Yeah.
So they're a powerful tool.
Yeah. Let me pick up a particular example. Now, I remember one day I was at Unipart with you. I can't remember why I'd gone there now, but one of the things I came across was this commitment that Unipart had made to becoming the safest company in the world. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking, why would Unipart want to do that? Now, just explain for people why that story is important in terms of recruiting staff, engaging clients. I mean, just because that's a really interesting little target that you would think, well, what's that got to do with being a logistics business? I mean, just explore that. Well, I mean, how did that all come about? Do you remember?
Well, it came about because it's absolutely sensible with every set of stakeholders that we engage with. It would be important to every set of stakeholders that were involved in a relationship with us. So if you think about employees, why would employees want to work for the safest company in the world? Well, they don't want to get hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, duh. Everybody wants to be in a safe environment, particularly important if you're in any level of manual handling, any level where there's movement of goods, where you could be physically injured, or any level where you could be injured by getting a virus or getting a disease or that. So having an organization that thinks about the safety of its employees as being paramount, that is a big confidence builder in employees, and it also promotes employees thinking about the welfare of their colleagues and in the things that they're doing. So they not only think about themselves, but they think about, well, we're in an organization that cares about safety. We need to make sure that this place is safe for all our people, and that we behave in a way that is safe for everyone. We don't do things that are unsafe for our colleagues. So employees, absolutely fundamental. Customers, similarly, an accident in a workplace can cause huge problems for a customer who might be expecting a delivery. It might be delayed, or it might simply drive cost and delay in an operation, and the customer will have to bear the brunt of that. So customers are thinking, we absolutely want to do business with a company that's going to be safe. And similarly, if you've got suppliers, they want to know that when they're doing business with you, they're coming to a place where their people, their drivers, their technicians, whoever is coming, is going to be safe on that site and is not going to be at risk because someone being off work because they were hurt, or maybe being unable to work again because they were hurt, is incredibly costly on many, many, many levels. But, just in terms of the moral contract between
Yeah.
an employee and the employer, it's kind of fundamental. So safety, if you look at it, it's almost like it is a fundamental aspect of that relationship. What happens is, because it is so fundamental, companies can become very complacent about it. And it can become a thing that they don't think about very much. And therefore, things become unsafe, not deliberately, but because they're not focused. I think what happened in Unipart was the notion of being the safest or one of the safest companies in the world was something that drove discussions about safety and an interest in improving safety all the time. So people were thinking about it. People were looking at what they did and were looking at operations. Say, can we make this safer? Can we? Because this is important. So the narrative framework was safety is important. What then happened was, as people made improvements and talked about it, they told the stories. The stories of how
So
people
we've
improved.
improved this and we've improved that and we've done that because, and that
Those,
creates a different conversation with clients, doesn't it? You're not just saying we're your logistics supplier and we'll do it for X amount of money. I mean, it's a different conversation, isn't it?
it's a very different conversation. It becomes much more about the value you deliver,
Yeah.
rather than lowest possible price. Lowest possible price and 35% failure rate is not a good equation.
Yeah.
You may pay a slightly, you might pay more for a relation with the company that has a 1% failure rate or a 0% failure rate, because that company has worked through all the elements of continually improving the things they do to continually ensure that the customer gets what the customer needs when the customer needs it at all times. And that means you don't have breakdowns in delivery, you don't have breakdowns in service delivery because people are hurt or people have accidents.
But it struck me that it's a kind of a success story rather than a failure story. Because when you might pay less for something, but there are lots of problems with that, that becomes a story about failure, doesn't it? If you're
Absolutely.
getting it right, and if your customers are happy, and if you're delivering the things that people want, and if people are happy to be, all those, that's a really positive success story. It seems to be. So my take on it. Not that I know that much about this, but it seemed to me to shift the agenda from stories about things going wrong to stories about how we've done things right.
Absolutely. This is was one of the foundation of foundation points of all the things we did, where we told stories. We used different media. So we used written media, we used video, we used face-to-face conference discussions, where we would tell stories about what our people were doing across the organization, and present that as a way of not just sharing information, which was important, and you would do that, sharing knowledge, but it was also a way of validating and reaffirming this is what the company believes in, and building confidence in people to be able to do it themselves, for other people to do it. So you look at a thing and you say, well, if they could do it, we could do it. So let me give you a quick real example. We had a program, it still runs in Unipart, called Mark in Action, where we recognize people who delivered outstanding personal customer service. And this was done through a very simple method. Someone would nominate someone for a Mark in Action award. It would go to judges. Judges would scrutinize it. And if the person received the award, the nominator was asked to come along and tell a story about why they nominated that person. So it had to be absolutely valid. They had to stand up and tell what they believed in, why they nominated the person, and they would do that in the structure of the story. Now that story became something that could be repeated time and time and time again in many different forums. So it became an important part of the culture. It became an asset.
Yeah.
And the impact it would have would be people, first of all, the person who received the award obviously was thanked and felt great about that. And, it was like getting an Academy Award. They were recognized by their peers. The second point was that people around listening to that would look at the person and go, well, that person is not that different from me.
Hmm.
And if they could do it, I could do it. So what did they do? That was the sort of behavior that would garner this kind of interest and recognition. And I could do that. So it inspired it in others. And the third point is that people from outside the organization who would hear these stories and think about it would say, well, gee, I would love that to be the sort of person that was working in my company. I would like to have that relationship. I could trust this organization if the people in this organization are behaving in this sort of way. They'll look after my business, and I can see that. This is evidence that they will actually live up to the claim they're making. Yeah. So these stories had huge value. Yeah. And there were thousands of awards that were made over.
Yeah, and that's just one. It's just one thing, isn't it? Let me go back to the beginning. So when you arrived at Unipart, I mean, as director of corporate affairs, or whatever your job title was, I mean, how did you start the process? Because I mean, there'd been some work done on creating, as it were, the narrative around Unipart, the story. Your job was to take that forward. How did you, I mean, just go back to, when you arrived, what was your thinking? What did you do? How did you approach the process of kind of, I mean, this is probably the wrong way to describe it, but kind of reinvigorating, the narrative to move it in the direction that you wanted to move it in? I mean, just go back to the beginning and tell us what your thinking was.
Well, it was when I came to Unipart, it was quite a young company, and it had a leadership group largely driven by the chief executive, John Neal, who were already committed to some very strong principles around communication and around employee engagement and continuous improvement. I got there the year after they had opened the Unipart University. It was quite a controversial thing to do when you're sitting in Oxford, where they have a couple of universities already. And I saw the commitment that that organization made to continuous learning and to improving its people. And I was very impressed by that. So it was a company that attracted me because of what had already been done. And they say, okay, so what is going to be your contribution to this? And at the time, I couldn't see what that might be. But as I grew into the company, I began to see there were things we could push the envelope a little bit further. So they were already doing great stuff, but we could do things a little bit better. We could sharpen the way we talked about things. We could sharpen our messaging. We could have maybe stronger relationships with some external organizations, media, trade bodies, where we had a more open and a more regular connection. So, for instance, I used to take the chief executive out for interviews with people I knew in the media on a quarterly basis in the early days. And they welcomed that. So we might go to a hotel and take a room or get a lunch table, private lunch, and have journalists come in one at a time through the day and do interviews. And that enabled the chief executive to tell stories about our company, which those journalists obviously found incredibly valuable because they would retell those stories.
Yeah.
And so it was about enriching and expanding the narrative framework in through different media, through different connections and different relationships. And as we progressed in time, there became this thing called the internet, which wasn't there when I first joined. And this was an enormous complication because this created for us a basis for being publishers ourselves. So we could use the internet and the reach that that gave us to be able to express stories, express our values, talk about what we were doing in an easier way, and to do more of it and to do it in a more creative way. And so one of the things I began to think about a lot more was, how do you make those messages succinct? How do you keep them authentic? How do you present them in a way that's compelling and interesting to people, not just puff, because that's, nobody likes that.
People can see through that, can't they?
Yeah. And stories were an essential part of that. Could we tell valid, authentic, interesting stories about what was going on in the company? And the other side of that was, and what sort of media are we going to use to do that? So some will be written, some will be video, and some would be graphic. And I recall at one stage, for some odd reason, I decided we should have a giant infographic that explained what the company was about. And so we took a 100-foot wall, a 100-foot corridor, which had nothing. It was a long corridor, rather boring.
I remember that, actually.
We created this infographic that started at one end. You could read, and it would explain to you the story of the company and what the company had done and why we were doing the things we did. And you could introduce a new employee to the company by literally walking them down the corridor and using this graphic as, if you like, a prompt to talk about what the company believed in, what it was doing, how it was doing it, and the role that the employee would play. And so I think what was exciting about Unipart was that I kind of had permission to do those things, that the leadership team was strongly engaged in communication and in using new ways to communicate, and were very good at recognizing the power of the story to engage people and to validate ideas. Spreadsheets are wonderful, but spreadsheets don't tell you a story unless you can really deeply understand them. Stories are things you can connect with at any level. Anyone can do that. And they're rich and they're emotional. They tap into a part of the brain that other forms of information don't.
Yeah. One of the things that interested me about our time there was the way you worked with suppliers, the kind of Oxfordshire community, third sector organisations, etc. I mean, you did an awful lot. I mean, maybe you see this in a different way, but what I saw was somebody who really spent a lot of time engaging with the local supply, the kind of local supplier network, because some of those companies were Unipart suppliers, some of them weren't, of course. Community organisations, the local authority, universities, schools. I mean, you did lots and lots of stuff that was about engaging with that community. I mean, when you go back to the start of all that, I mean, was that about? I mean, just explain what was that about? I mean, because it struck me as a great way for Unipart to build a really positive relationship with local people. That was what I thought was going on. What was your take on that? And why did you put such a lot of effort into that? I mean, because it's very successful, I think, as well.
I think I'll come back to the notion of framework. And it comes down to a phrase that John Neal used with me and deeply impressed me with the very first time I met him, um, where he talked about establishing long-term shared destiny relationships for mutual benefit with our stakeholders. And that was such a loaded statement. I
Mm.
had to actually stop him and say, can you just unpack that for me? Explain how that takes place. And it was a it was really a philosophy in many ways of not existing in a vacuum, but understanding that you were part of a community and that you could operate within that community, thinking about the long term rather than just short term benefit, but also thinking about how do we get mutual benefit out of this relationship. And so when I would talk about running a program where Unipart people would go into local schools and mentor young people, there was no issue with engaging people in doing that because they could see that actually it would be a benefit to the individuals participating because they would build their mentoring skills. It would be a benefit to the young people because they would receive good mentoring. It would be could be a benefit to the company long term because some of those young people might ultimately become our employees or might even become our customers at some stage. So you could see that we could have mutual benefit from the relationship. And that meant it opened opportunities for us to think wider than the transactional,
Mm.
which in many, many organizations is going to be the singular focal point of why they do things. Will we make any money out of this tomorrow?
Mm.
If not, don't do it. Now, I have to say, Unipart was very fortunate in that it was a very successful company. So it could do some things that were not necessarily depending on an immediate payback. It had the long term view.
Mm.
Could we invest in our people? Could we invest in our communities? Could we? And an investment means you get a return, right?
Yeah.
So do we understand the return? And the return is not necessarily going to be an item on a balance sheet that you could say we made so much profit out of this.
Mm.
But it may be a return in many, many, many other ways. And our view was always that if we worked with our local communities to make them safer and to make them work better, if we could help them improve in some aspects, education was a big point in that. Um, our employees lived in those communities. Our employees got benefit from that.
Mm.
We would have customers in those communities. So it's about thinking about the framework of your business, looking at it in the widest possible sense and understanding stakeholder relationships and
Mm.
understanding what things were truly valuable and things you
And
would do and
yeah,
things you wouldn't do.
yeah, and to come back to the storytelling piece, I mean, one of the things that struck me when I first came across you and Unipart was that everyone had a story to tell about something that they'd done with either you or Unipart. If you were in Oxfordshire and you met people and you said, "Do you know about Unipart?" "Oh yeah, I know Unipart. They do this, they've done that." Well, and what also struck me about that was that most of the, not every single one, but most of those stories were really positive. I mean, inevitably there are going to be some people who've got negative views,
Sure.
but generally speaking, people had really positive. If you would ask them about their engagement with Unipart or Unipart people, they would be pretty positive on the whole. And those stories would be about very practical, useful stuff that Unipart had contributed or helped them with, or pointed them in the right direction to things, or whatever the thing was. And it always struck me that so many companies don't have a particularly positive um, story in the local community, or people don't tell particularly positive stories about them in the local area.
Well, I think that there's two levels to that, Paul. One is I think we made an effort
Yeah.
to do positive things with our community, with our employees, with our customers. So we made an effort to do those
Mm.
things. And then secondly, we told people about it.
Yeah.
You know, we told those stories of what we'd done and why we'd done it, and hopefully encouraged others to do so. It's an interesting point you make about the reputation Unipart had,
Yeah.
and I hope still has. I was at a garden party for new high sheriff one occasion, and someone introduced me to someone else, and the person said, "Oh, you're from Unipart? Oh, I know that's a really good company. I don't know what you do, but I know you're a really good company." And
Yeah.
I thought, I don't know if I'm doing a good job or I'm not doing a good job based on that statement.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because we're a business to business organization that basically dealt with large blue chip companies, to help them to be able to do more
And
efficient.
reputation, I mean, in one sense, reputation is the non-financial payback, isn't it? Having a good reputation is actually gives you a financial return, not immediately, but
Yeah,
that reputation is actually really, really important, isn't it?
I think it's very important because it's the thing that attracts people to you.
Mm.
It's the thing that gets you the best people to want to work for you, the customers who want to do business with you, the community that wants to be supportive of you. Um, and it helps it most in some ways in the times when things don't go right. And that happens to every organization.
Yeah.
Every organization has things that don't go well or something occurs, and you have to make some difficult decisions. And it's at those times that actually your reputation is the thing that
Yeah.
helps you to survive a crisis,
Yeah.
because people say, well, I know it's a really good organization, they've done some wonderful things, it may have had a problem here,
Yeah.
and I understand that.
I mean, I know you guys talked a lot about, you made a lot of those things. I mean, there was always stuff about Unipart in the press and the awards and all that positive stuff. But the other thing that struck me that was really powerful is it wasn't just the stories that you told, it was the stories that other people told that were powerful. I mean, in one sense, that's the proof of the pudding. It's not you telling good stories, it's other people coming away and saying, I was at Unipart the other week and we did this thing and it wasn't it great or whatever. I mean, I remember, for example, I remember bringing a CEO of a third sector organisation up to Unipart to meet you and to look at the Unipart way. It was really interesting hearing her afterwards talking about what she got out of that experience, which wouldn't have happened if you and the organisation hadn't been open to people coming in, asking about what you're doing, talking about how you help, and all those other things. Because it's the stories that people go away with, I think, that enhance the reputation as much as the things that you plaster over the press, if you get my drift.
Well, it's a really good point, Paul, and it was one that sometimes would raise questions with
Mm.
individuals in the organization. Well, why are you spending your time taking these people around explaining what we do? And I always remember chief executive remarking to me in a conversation, someone had asked that question. He said, well, look, you don't know who those people will talk to
Yeah,
about us afterwards. It's the things that they go and talk about in other places. And there were so many times when I can recall politicians or business leaders referencing Unipart in another context as an example of the way to engage people or continuous learning or innovation. And it was because we had invited them previously to come and have a walk around and see what we're doing, and understand our business. And they would come and because they were interested in it. It was an interesting story. And then they would go and talk about that. And so our doors were generally open to people
mm.
who would want to come and learn about what we did. One is because our narrative framework was one that was strong and clear and was about engaging people. As I mentioned, long-term shared
Yeah,
destiny relationships, um, with stakeholders. And secondly, because we had stories it wasn't hard to do.
yeah,
So it wasn't something that we were going to go, oh my God, we have to prepare this in, it's going to take us weeks to prepare this. It wasn't. We could just do it because people were prepared to tell the stories. The stories were available. They were on the walls. They were in the videos. That the content was there because Unipart was very good at telling stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And got the benefit of that, which is really what it's all about, really. I mean, I think you've demonstrated the importance of storytelling and narrative development pretty comprehensively there. Let me take you back to the beginning again. What if you look back over that period, what would you say you learnt from the experience? I mean, you came in as a storyteller because you obviously got a journalist as a background and you've been doing it for other companies. But when you look back, I mean, what did you learn from that experience of doing it there? Because that must have been the, if you like, the biggest storytelling job you'd had in your career. What was your takeaways from that?
I think it was about simplifying ideas.
Right.
And can you simplify ideas so that they will be most relevant to the audience that you're talking to? So it's no good talking in complex technical terms to people who that will wash over and they'll have no connection with that. They won't remember it. I think it was about learning to tell stories in ways that were authentic and memorable, and part to be memorable were also visual. So you were creating pictures in people's minds. So at one period when I was running a company within Unipart, we ran a consultancy group, and we were working with a government-led organization through the GTI that was helping small businesses. It was called Business Link.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, yeah.
Helping them to put together a learning organization in Business Link, and we were talking a lot about customer service. And we weren't really prepared. This wasn't in the learning material, but I decided to tell them a story about the best customer service I had ever experienced, which was at Disney World. And I told them a story about how we'd been there and the people had seen a need that we hadn't even identified quite well, and had predicted for us where we would get the best value and how we would do this and direct it. And they delivered it. And so it was an amazing customer experience based on just average working level people who could look at a customer and say, I see what you need, let me deliver it. And I told this story to a group, and we were doing 5 workshops. I told it to a group in one workshop, and I told it again and again and again to every workshop. And we finally did a plenary where we brought people from each of the groups together to one large workshop. And I remember my colleague saying to me, you're not going to tell that story again, are you? Because I'm really fed up with it. I've heard it 4 times now. And, please do not tell that story again. And I said, I'm not going to tell the story. You guys are. So I asked the people who had attended the workshops, who were all sitting at different tables, to tell the story. And I said, start with one table, and I'm going to stop you, and you hand on to the next, and you tell it. And they told that story almost word for word. They remembered so. And when I queried it afterwards, I said, how did you remember that? And they said, we could see you there. We just, it was like watching a movie. We kind of could imagine you and your family and this guy, and the way you described it, it just was an image in our brain, and it related to the way we do things with our customers, with our clients, the way we behave. And we remembered it. It was really impactful. And I thought that was incredible that they heard that story once and were able to recount it weeks later, and they had a shared experience around it. And to me, I don't know if it's something that you say was a learning point, but it reinforced the importance of impactful storytelling.
Yeah, because it's not just the story, is it? It's a story that's memorable. It's a story that
Absolutely.
resonates with people, isn't it?
It's a story other people can tell,
Yeah,
that they can take it away and go, let me tell you about what this guy told me. He told me a story about this. And it's when you can craft a story that is simple, authentic, clear,
mm,
highly memorable, has a visual element to it because you can create pictures with words, and is on the agenda of the audience. So is of interest to that
yeah,
audience.
yeah,
Yeah. You create a piece of content that has real value and can be shared.
yeah.
And I think that's
Let
what
me pick up.
storytelling is about.
Yeah, I mean, let me pick up the point about visual storytelling because that's really coming to the fore now. I mean, the amount, if you look at the amount of content that goes up on YouTube, for
Yeah.
example, it's really phenomenal. I mean, and I remember you actually moving into that because we did a number of different things where we started to make videos and things. And I
Yeah.
remember being fascinated by that at the time. What was your thinking about how you, if you like, weave together the kind of the story bit with the visual bit? You know, I mean, I don't know anything about making movies, for example. So I wouldn't know how you do that. But what was your take on that? Because it seems to me that the visual piece has become really important. And what you often see are lots of visual stuff, and you think, well, what's all that about? Because the story bit is not connected to it or not right with it. I mean, what's your take on connecting the story structure, if you like, to the visual piece? I mean, how did you approach that?
So some people think in pictures,
Right.
and I guess to some extent that's what I do. I mean, professionally, I I've produced many videos and directed videos and scripted videos for many many years. And one of the things you start with um, is a storyboard or a shot list,
Right.
and you start thinking. You think about the pictures,
Yeah.
and in some ways, that starts to shape the story. You've got to the two things have to integrate. Um, you can have a talking head like we're doing. We're just chatting, you
Yeah.
know. But if I wanted to make some content, some video with this, I would be wanting to have images to support the things that we're saying.
Yeah.
So I would be having a panel with almost like cartoons or sketches or what these images
So
would
that's
look
how
like.
you plan it out using a storyboard. Is that what
That's how you plan
you?
out. And in some ways this becomes the framework in your own brain, that when you start telling a story, you start talking about the picture
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
people would see. So if I give you an example of that, when I talked about the Disney World experience, what I said to people was, look, we went to Disney World, there were 10 of us, our entire family was in one place, and we got to Magic Kingdom, this huge place with all these colors and all this music, and we stood there and said, where are we going to go for lunch? We couldn't find the place where we wanted to go for lunch. My wife stood there with a book in her hand with lists of restaurants, and we were trying to find the restaurant we thought would be good, and we couldn't locate it. So they're all standing along this in a line in the street. Now I walked over to talk to a guy and ask him, and this guy was basically sweeping the road, and he was a tall man doing his job. His name was Roger. On his coat he had Roger there, and I stopped him. I said, Roger, can you help me? And he said, yeah, sure, man. What do you need? I said, I'm looking for this restaurant. Roger turned and looked at me and then looked at my family, and he said, are they with you? And I said, yeah, they are. It's my family. He said, oh man, he said, you're not going to go to that restaurant. He said, there's 10 of you. He said, this is a restaurant where people will sit down at tables and get waitress service. And you're not all going to be able to sit on one table. And by the way, it's lunchtime and it's going to be really busy. And you should have booked that if you wanted to go there. So it's not a good place for you to go. He said, I'll tell you what, there's a much better place for you. If you go up Main Street here, walk up this Main Street, pass all these shops and things, and at the top of the road, you're going to see an ice cream place, but they have sandwiches there. And the lady in the door, who is the greeter, is named Mary. If you tell Mary that I sent you here, she's going to seat you in the back. There's some seating where all of you could sit down. Now, there's no waitress service, but you get up and get your own food. You can get sandwiches. And is that what you want? Yeah, sure, sandwiches. So okay, so you can get that. You can sit there, and there's plenty of room for all of you, and it'd be a better place. So I walk over, tell my family. They're like, "Where is this? We're not going there. Follow me." Here they're like a crocodile up Main Street, the castle in front of us, all this music, and I come to the door of this shop, and who's there? There's Mary in a blue dress standing there. And I say, "Hi, Mary. Roger sent me." "So Roger sent you?" She knows Roger. They know each other. Obviously, this is all valid. I say to her, "We'd like to come in for lunch." She said, "Yeah, we've got tables in the back where you can probably, it's a clear table for all of you, 10 of you, but there's no waitress service. However, if you want to get some sandwiches, some ice cream, so you get a discount, you can go and sit there." And the story went on. Now, for me, what was important was that in my memory, I saw those pictures. I
And I was
remember,
visualizing it as you were saying it, actually. I mean, it really does resonate.
and I think it's important
Mm.
to try and think about things in that way so that people begin to visualize, and it creates for them a memory.
Mm.
They're now sharing your memory.
Mm.
They're having images that are stronger in there. And there is a world of neuroscience supports this around creating imagery and memory.
I mean, it's such an interesting idea, isn't it? That the output of a story is a memory.
Yeah. The
And that's
shared
why,
memory.
in one sense, that's why they're so powerful, isn't it? Because, people have watched a story or been told a story or participated in it, and they come away with the memory that's why it sticks. Unlike just looking at a list of facts or a PowerPoint presentation, in one sense, that's why it sticks because it becomes a memory.
Absolutely. And I think, when running a small business as I did, the way we expressed our value to customers was to talk about the things that we had done and to talk about them visually and to tell them stories about how we had worked with other customers and make them very visual for them so it builds trust, it validates your proposition, it explains your proposition,
Yeah.
which sometimes can be clunky. And we've in the big gig, the consistent comment that I had with the 60 companies we dealt with who were doing big gigs was, I'm not clear on your value
Yeah.
proposition.
Yeah,
Can
that's
you
right.
clarify the value proposition?
Which is extraordinary, really, wasn't it? That happens so often. Yeah.
But if you can tell a story about that, I can understand it better.
Yeah, yeah. Frank, that's a lovely statement to end on, actually. If you can tell a story, I can understand it better. I mean, I think that is a great piece of advice. So thank you for making a bit of time to talk about what you've done at Unipart. I mean, obviously I'm biased. I thought it was you did a great piece of work there, and I enjoyed the bits of it that I was involved with. And I really appreciate you making time to come and talk about it. I know it's a few years ago now, but it was a very, very powerful experience, I thought. And, I think my view is you did a really, really good job. So thank you for
Well,
taking the time to come and share that.
thank you for saying that. I mean, it was a real privilege working there, and it was a real privilege working with people in that organization who had um, the enthusiasm and commitment to do things slightly differently and to take some chances, and we're committed to that. So yeah, I mean, I'm very grateful for that, the time I spent there, the things I learned there, and I hope the company, now having retired from there, I hope the company continues on that track to be able to do things even better in future. But it's lovely being able to chat to you about it, and we had some great times over those years together doing big
Yeah,
gigs and things, and it's always been very exciting to try new ideas.
yeah, absolutely. Frank, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I'll see you soon.
My pleasure. Take care, Paul.
Cheers, fella. Bye bye.